right, so what's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. We're just gonna get pretty much straight into it here. We're gonna get into part 2 of the Amber King's Jaghatai Con, the Great Con of Warhammer, voice acted 40K lore, entire character history video. We already did part 1, put that out. We're gonna get into part 2 here. So as always, links below down in the description for the original video and the Amber King's channel. If you want to become a YouTube member, click the join button down there, see if any of the tiers have any kind of interest in you. You can get some early access to videos, some other stuff that I'm trying to figure out to do for you guys, etc, etc. All the promos, shameless plugs, yada yada. Let's get into the video without further ado. All right, so part 2 here. All in all, I believe, if I could be getting my history and stuff mistaken, but I believe this was a giant battle between some of the various Astartes chapters and or legions. I keep saying chapters because that's what I'm used to hearing, but there were legions anyway. But I believe this was a huge battle between the various Space Marine factions and an Orc Law that happened, and I believe this was like the last major event that happened before the Horus heresy. I could be wrong, I could be getting my history stuff mixed up, but if my brain is correct, then that's what we're gonna get into here, and so I guess we'll find out.
Some of us had it easier than others.
Mortarion muttered. Fulgrim looked archly at Sanguinius. An awkward silence fell.
You should not regret that,
said the Khan. The other three turned, as if surprised that he had a voice.
The hardship.
Mortarion glared at him sourly. His pallid flesh almost matched Ulinor's overcast, humid skies.
I don't regret it,
he said.
I could only regret that only some of us gained our father's favor, though. I could regret that.
Sanguinius took a sip of wine from his glass, serenely unconcerned.
Brother, you should be pleased for Horus.
Why?
Mortarion's expression was pinched.
Because he was found first, had the longest to work with his legion. If it had been you on Chthoniya, if it had been me, we might have been in his place now.
Fulgrim sniffed.
Speak for yourself. Being War Master is not the only accolade.
Sanguinius laughed.
No more talk of your Palatine Aquila, brother. You will make him more jealous.
I'm not jealous. Not of Horus, nor of you.
Scowled Mortarion, missing the humor in Sanguinius's voice.
You don't understand the problem.
Fulgrim leaned forward, clasping his long hands together.
Which is?
While he was leading us, we fought to gain even a glance or gesture from him. That was acceptable, for none of us are his rival. Nothing in the galaxy is his rival. Now we will fight to gain a glance from Horus. But Horus is not the architect of this. He is just one of us. It will...
Interesting. This is a very interesting conversation. And it's obvious that Mortarion's... It's very interesting that Mortarion seems to have such... I don't know, I guess disdain. I don't know if that's the proper word that I'm looking for Horus. But I get his idea. He's upset because he's worked so hard to even get a small bit of acknowledgement from the Emperor. But now it's even gotten lesser to the effect where Horus is even above them, and to get anything from the Emperor, it first has to go through Horus. So it's very interesting, and, you know, I guess he is, even though he says he's not jealous, maybe it's just envy. He might be envious of the fact that, not even necessarily about Horus being the War Master and he's not the War Master, but just that Horus now has essentially a closer connection, I guess you could say, to the Emperor than any of the other Primarchs, by the Emperor promoting Horus to War Master and putting him in charge. The only person above Horus now is the Emperor, so in order for anyone else to get to the Emperor for any kind of word acknowledgement, to talk to him, whatever, that first kind of has to go through Horus. So I see that. It's kind of interesting. This is a very interesting conversation. Mortarion sounds like he'd be fun at parties, though. Let me tell you. Man sounds like just a bundle of joy.
Horus is not the architect of this. He is just one of us. It will lead to trouble.
Fulgrim shot a tolerant look at Sanguinius.
He is jealous.
The Khan shook his head. Fulgrim could be irritatingly stupid.
No, he speaks the truth. It should never have happened.
Sanguinius looked at the Khan thoughtfully.
I thought you, of all of us, would feel joy for Horus.
The Khan shrugged.
He is the best of us. I begrudge him nothing, and I have taught him so. But it should never have happened.
So should it have been you?
Asked Fulgrim, acerbiacally. Mortarion snorted again, but Sanguinius said nothing.
I wouldn't have taken it,
said the Khan.
Of course you would have,
said Fulgrim. The Khan shook his head.
I have no use for another title. My people give me enough.
Sanguinius smiled.
My brother, I think you are the most inscrutable of us all. I know what Rogel wants, and I know what Rabute wants. But even after so long, I have no idea what you want.
He wants to be left alone.
Said Fulgrim.
Pretty much.
To shoot off into the stars and hunt down Xenos on those delightful jet bikes. They're devilishly fast. I heard from a contact on Mars, Jaghatai, that you do strange things to your ships.
The Khan shot him a heavy-lidded stare.
I heard you do strange things to your warriors.
Fulgrim's slender face briefly flared with anger, but Sanguinius laughed.
I wonder which one of you would win in a duel.
The angel mused.
That would be interesting.
Name the place, brother.
I put my money on Jaghatai.
Fulgrim said to the Khan. The angel mused.
Name the place, brother.
Fulgrim said to the Khan.
I'd even travel to Chogarus if you built a palace to keep the dust from my armor.
The Khan felt the insult. It stabbed at him deeply, but his expression never changed. They could never know, none of them, how much their close fraternity rankled him.
You would lose,
said the Khan. Fulgrim grinned, but there was something fragile in it.
Oh?
You would lose because you treat it like a game, like you treat everything, and I would not. You would lose because you know nothing of me, and I know everything of you because you shouted from the turrets of your battle cruisers.
Yep.
My prowess remains unknown.
Yeah, and that's the one really big thing about Khan that I feel like I would have in common with him in his situations. You know, you don't really know who your enemies and your friends are, even amongst the Primarchs and even the Emperor, etc., etc. And so the idea of keeping yourself guarded and you're trying to think of how to word it. Just the idea of keeping, you don't want to show all your cards essentially in any situation because you don't know who you're going to be up against, even your, the Primarch brother in here. So his words definitely have merit in the sense that they don't know him. They don't know how he would fight, what his tactics really would be, how he would be in a duel. And he's obviously very much studied Fulgrim, and Fulgrim is very, boisterous and boisterous. And yeah, my money would honestly probably would be on Jaghatai. I think out of all of these, though, I think Sanguinius would probably wipe the floor with everyone, but I could be wrong. I don't know enough about all of them. But anyway, let's continue.
From the turrets of your battle cruisers, my prowess remains unknown. You have some reputation as a swordsman, brother, but I make no boast when I tell you I would leave you choking on it.
Fulgrim's cheeks flushed. For a moment, he looked like he would go for his blade. As ever, Sanguinius' calm smile soothed the moment.
Now I regret bringing this up. In the cause of peace, shall we put this stupidity behind us? We are not at war, and never likely to be, and that is truly a blessing.
Who'd have thought it?
Said Mortarion to the Khan, a shrewd glint in his roomery eyes.
You do have your pride.
As do you.
Then what would be the wager on us, brother?
Asked Mortarion.
What would you pay if we fought?
The Khan sighed.
No, I grow tired of...
Tell me.
Mortarion insisted.
Or do you only consider the odds with sword dancers?
The Khan stared back at him. As he did so, he realized that, of all his 17 brothers, Mortarion was the only one who, like him, had remained on the utter margins during the Great Crusade. Even Alfarius had played more of a role at its center. The Death Lord was as mysterious to him as the war.
Interesting.
Intriguing,
I don't know.
he said, truthfully enough.
It would be interesting to find out.
Mortarion laughed then, but what could be seen of his expression was crooked. His whole face seemed arranged for dourness, as if levity risked cracking it.
That it would. But we have nothing to fight over, you and I, so breathe easy.
No,
Asked Sanguinius, seriously this time.
not even Librarius.
The crooked smile faded.
That's different.
The angel took another sip
That's
of
true.
his wine.
That's true. Mortarion, from what I understand, Mortarion very much is like anti-psyker, any kind of use of the warp. He's very against. And so, yeah, Jaghatai's use of his storm seers, storm callers, whatever he calls them, psychers essentially. Yeah, they would be at odds with that. And especially because of how much of a seemingly cultural significance that they have for Jaghatai. And I hadn't thought about that. But from what I understand, they end up having a duel later on. And I believe, well, I'll let the video talk about it because I'm sure he's going to get into that because that's a big point in the story. But yeah, needless to say, they end up having a duel for those who don't know.
Faded.
That's different.
The angel took another sip of his wine.
How so?
You've not heard the news then? Our father has taken the matter in hand. I know you take your creation seriously, but you must know it couldn't be suffered to go on.
Fulgrim looked intrigued.
What do you mean, taken in hand?
There will be a reckoning.
The Death Lord shot a wry glance at the Khan, as though reveling in some secret knowledge that would become public very soon.
I'll be there when it happens. I hope you will be there too. Some fights are too important to be left to advocates.
Interesting.
Nearly 2 centuries of warfare. Thousands of worlds conquered, and millions of Xenos and non-compliant colonies have been slain. It was in the ashes of the Imperium's greatest victory over an enormous greenskin war that the Imperium changed forever. Ullanor, cleansed of alien filth at the dawn of the 32nd millennium, held a muster of billions of superhuman and mortal warriors. Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the Lunar Wolves, was named War Master. The Emperor himself handed the responsibility of the Great Crusade to his most favored son. It was a mistake. Jaghatai had seen the fate.
See, and I wonder, like, is Horus really his most favored son, or is it just? Yeah, I don't know. From things that I've kind of read and various videos, I don't know if it's necessarily his favorite son is the right terminology, but I guess that's also probably how the other Primarchs would have seen it. Because by making him War Master and essentially putting him in charge of everything, he's elevated Horus to like another status level above the Primarchs. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, because it's interesting. I know that Horus believes that even he didn't deserve to be War Master, and he thought that Sanguinius actually would have been better. And if I remember correctly, I could be getting some of my lore and story mixed up. But I believe originally Sanguinius was supposed to be at Ullanor instead of Horus, but something happened and he couldn't make it, so Horus had to go there with his legions instead. And so that's why Horus got the glory for that. I could be mistaken. And then that's why, you know, he got promoted to War Master and instead. But I believe Horus and the majority of the other Primarchs actually think Sanguinius should have been. And that would be an interesting what if video in and of itself, had, you know, that happen. If Sanguinius had been War Master, what would have, you know, would the heresy have ever happened at all? Would it still have happened as it did? Or I guess it obviously wouldn't have happened as it did, but would Horus still have turned traitor? Would he have still been injured and corrupted by Erebus and Lorgar, etc., etc.? You know what I mean? So anyway.
Most favored son, it was a mistake. Jaghatai had seen the fate of emperors who stood back, how depraved, corrupt, and selfish they became. Why did his father leave the conquest? Why did he not tell them why? More lies he knew was justified under the guise of doing what they thought was best for humanity. The dynamic had changed forever. At a time when Jaghatai had needed a brother, a friend, not a superior officer. The Librarius, the Chagorian Stormseers, the backbone of Chagoris, their guides from the plains all the way to the stars were under threat. A divide had been growing over the latter decades of the Great Crusade. Those, such as Leman Russ and Mortarion, who felt an utter disgust towards those who drew on the powers of the warp. Even Corvus Corax and Rogel Dawn were adverse. Many lie in the middle, but it was Jaghatai, Sanguinius, and Magnus who were their most ardent defenders.
It's interesting. It almost sounds like if the Horus heresy hadn't happened as it did with Horus getting corrupted, there may have been another civil war that would have happened over the Psykers eventually anyway. But I guess the Emperor could have stepped in and created sanctions or laws or rules or whatever that could have allowed, you know, Psykers in certain capacities, or if they use their powers in certain ways, you know, they could have made laws, commandments, whatever you want to say, for keeping them in line in certain ways, et cetera, et cetera. But it almost sounds like, you know, there was already a division happening between some of the forces just on the idea of Psykers alone and their use and not, and, you know, the use of stuff with the warp. Interesting.
Sanguinius and Magnus who were their most ardent defenders. Jaghatai had been reluctant to plant himself within the politics of the Imperium, but Sanguinius decades ago had convinced him to fight for his Stormseers, lest the decision be made in his absence. Over the latter part of the Great Crusade, Jaghatai and Yasuge had tried to show Horus the necessity of having Psykers in their arsenal, displaying on numerous campaigns his Stormseer's effectiveness in countering other Xenos Psykers. But the chance had been lost. Horus was now War Master, the commander, the one who could not be shown to pick sides or have favorites. Jaghatai had lost an ally, but he could also feel he was losing a friend. There was a chasm between him and Horus, a distance bred from the hierarchy. They could both feel it. Fraternity was obligation. That old feeling kept creeping in as Jaghatai left the muster of Ullanor, frustrated and disheartened, though he did not leave alone. Ilia Ravalion, a member of the Departamento Munistorum, was assigned to the 5th Legion at the dawn of this new era. The elderly woman, born on Terra, with a photographic memory, proved to be adept at all things logistical. She was a counterbalance to a legion that already had its eyes upon the next target, often overlooking what was left behind. Jaghatai and Ilia over the coming years forged a bond. Over drinking wine and playing Go together, Jaghatai, the free-spirited superhuman, with the orderly Terran-born mortal. Though the presence of the Primarch had made her feel nauseous and even lightheaded in the beginning, the elderly general was able to look Jaghatai in the eye, to stand face to face and offer her wisdom and experience, something that became invaluable in the coming campaign.
I bet.
Chondax, the fortress world inhabited by the remnants of the vile greenskins that had fled Ullanor. The beginning of the grueling campaign aligned with the reckoning Jaghatai's mysterious brother Mortarion had spoken of, the Council of Nikaea. Assembled from the highest bureaucrats, senior Astra Militarum, and a representative from all of the Adeptus Astartes legions, the Fabricator General of Mars, Malkador, and even the Emperor. The building debate in the shadows finally surfaced. The Librarius, Psychers, and their sanctioning in the Imperium had to be dealt with. Two sides had been drawn: Magnus, the Blood Angels, and Jaghatai, the Librarius. Jaghatai, Yasuge, and all those on their side spoke vehemently for the justification of psychic powers. But everything came tumbling down with the revelation of Magnus's arrogance, that he had delved into warp sorcery. He had gone too far. The pro-psychers failed, Yasugai feeling immense guilt for failing his friend and Primarch. The accumulation of decades of work, the crafting of a new Librarius rules created by Jaghatai, Sanguinis, and Magnus had gone. Jaghatai had often warned Magnus of his need to push limits, and now its cost was the Chagorian's way of life.
Meow.
But the message wouldn't reach the Kagan. Horrific warp storms began to form around Chondax. It made Ilia uncomfortable, but Jaghatai, in truth, was all too pleased to be out of range, forgotten, misunderstood, left alone. With Quinn Shah, Hasek, and his white scars, and a green tide in front of them, the 5th Legion headed to war.
Prospero.
I fear decrepitude, because all emperors are liars, all empires are lies. But there is only one unforgivable lie. That is the lie that says this is the end. You are the conqueror. You have achieved it, and now all that remains is to build walls higher and shelter behind them. Now, the lie says, the worlds are safe.
It is not enough to take from an enemy their life. Rather, take from them also their place of safety, their allies, their homes, and their loved ones. Crush all those in their care. Lay their chattels to waste.
Hear the
and then
lamenting of their
drive them
women.
alone and naked into the darkness. Take everything they have and burn it, for the mere pleasure of seeing the ash crackle between your fingers, and call it nothing more than a beginning. Chondax, the remnants of Ulrak Uruk's greenskin empire, would prove to be a bloody battle for the 5th. With horrific warp storms surrounding the sector of space, this was a war solely down to the white scars. Jaghatai, Ilia, Hasek, and Quinn Shah. For 7 years, the 5th Legion fought in a back and forth grueling campaign, the difficulties of the terrain being mountainous and marshy, the crux of their usual fast-paced encirclement maneuvers. And yet more seemed to be at play. Some, such as Shiban Khan of the Brotherhood of the Moon, felt that there was something wrong. Something wasn't sitting right. He had found legionaries with their wounds too clean for an orc's work.
Interesting.
It was as if they were fighting something greater than the mindless war before them. Jaghatai spent much of his time with his council, though he missed the guidance of his friend Yasugai. He found that his thoughts lay more towards the future, The Great Crusade was now expanding to the edges of the galaxy. After Chondax, what great holdouts were there? What if they had no more enemies left? After his conquest of Jagoris centuries ago, he had not settled down, placed himself on a throne, built walls, and told himself that he was safe, because it was a lie, and he despised lies. Something that had created so much distance between him and his father. But he only really feared one thing in this universe: decrepitude. The Emperor had arrived not long after his conquest of Jagoris. What would he have done in a time of peace? It was the way we made you. The words of Malkador. They had made him a hunter. Conquest was in his blood. They had made him uncomfortable with peace, lest in a way he fall to corruption. To live without purpose as humans leads us all down a spiraling path.
Which I feel like also lends more to the credence of there not really being a place for the Primarchs and the Astartes when the Crusade were to be end, and there to be, you know, this golden age of peace, word, and prosperity for humanity. I mean, the Emperor has shown with what he did with the Thunder Legion that once his tools are used and they have no more use, you know, they can be disposed of. So, and I feel like that's the case with the Primarchs. And I don't know, part of me feels like, yes, that would be the case, but another part of me also feels like he obviously has some kind of emotional attachment to the Primarchs with what ends up happening between him and Horus in the fight. Like, you know, it's clear that the Emperor held back until the very end of the fight because the only reason you could really think of would be because of his feelings for Horus. He didn't want to kill him, didn't want to destroy him, but, you know, obviously he had to do what he had to do. So who knows? Who knows what would actually happen whenever we got to that point, but
what would you do if that hollowness took over you? Would you lie to yourself and say that you are strong when there is no goal to achieve? But perhaps that fear would never come to pass, in a manner that Jaghatai would have never suspected. After years of brutal war, Jaghatai and the White Scars finally achieved victory. But at the precipice of this campaign, a fleet belonging to the 20th, the Alpha Legion, burst from the wall, assembling before the 5th Legion. Any communication was met with pure, dreaded silence. Two Astartes fleets stared at each other. Astropathic communications began to flood in. Through the tumultuous warp storms, Leman Russ of the Space Wolves had turned traitor. Magnus the Red and his 1,000 sons had been slain. The homeworld of Prospero destroyed. The War Master orders the 5th Legion to engage the traitor and bring him to justice. Madness. Jaghatai's mind began racing. His friend Magnus, was he truly dead? Russ was a traitor. So much power concentrated in so few hands. Look at this madness. Attention spread across the thousands of White Scar warriors and legionary personnel.
I bet.
The possibility of fighting another
yeah, that, like, can you imagine at that point? Because I feel like at that point there hasn't been any real infighting amongst the Astartes, right? So the idea, like you said, that Jaghatai's one of the only other Primarchs that he ever had any kind of connection with or friendship with is dead, which is unheard of because it's a Primarch. And then the idea of Leman Russ being called a traitor, who was also one of the people who was a staunch opposer of the Psykers, which has a very significant cultural place in his life with his Storm Seekers, Callers. I keep getting the terminology mixed up. Yeah, I mean, could you only imagine being in Jaghatai's place at that point in time? The thoughts and ideas going through your mind, and and what to really do. You would think that because of the rage that happened when his friend died and he went into a berserk, rage and wiped out all the orcs in the battle that was described in the previous video, that something similar would happen here, and that his need for vengeance against Russ would take over. But to my understanding, they stay on the sidelines until the truth is known. I guess let's just continue with the video and see where we go. But from my understanding, that's what happens. They don't actually engage one side or the other in the war until Jaghatai really knows what's going on.
Look at this madness. Attention spread across the thousands of White Scar warriors and legionary personnel. The possibility of fighting another legion. The horror that battle would entail was a sobering thought. More astropathic communications came through. Rogel Dawn of the Imperial Fist orders the White Scars to return to Terra and defend it alongside the Space Wolves. The War Master has turned traitor. More came flooding in. Lehman...
And that would be the other thing too, because then it's like, he's good friends with Horus. He looks up to Horus in a way. So now you've got opposing information. You got, Roel Dorn, who I don't think he has any kind of real connection to, is giving him orders, telling him to come back home, and that the War Master's turned traitor. That would be a hell of a position to be put in. Literally caught in a rock and a hard place.
Has turned traitor. More came flooding in. Lehman Russ of the Space Wolves requests the White Scars' aid against the Alpha Legion. They have turned traitor. Someone was lying. Was this Alpha Legion blockade the deception? Did they want Jaghatai to return to Terra? Did Russ speak the truth, and they were being held above Chondax? Or were the 20th simply waiting to see which side the 5th chose? Jaghatai hated the lies. Perhaps none of them were speaking the truth. They were the 5th, the White Scars, Ordu Jaghatai, and they were slaves to no one. He would find the truth for himself. The stalemate ended. The forgotten and underestimated Legion, in a move synchronized to perfection that would leave even the mighty Gilliman and Dawn jealous, launched the entire legionary fleet at once. The coordination, the skill was incredible. Finally, after years of serving by their side, Ilya, the Terran outsider, finally saw why Jaghatai and his sons had allowed themselves to be underestimated. And the sight brought her to genuine laughter. The chisel, an instant, tightly formed wedge burst through the Alpha Legion blockade. Their destination, the truth. Jaghatai made his way to Prospero. After days, unnerved, trying to decipher the truth, the White Scars finally arrived, only to find a husk. Pollutants, smog, and a violent storm filled the ruined skies of this once beautiful world of Prospero. Not just the people and the cities, but the planet itself had been annihilated. Jaghatai felt the cold rage. He felt sadness and confusion. He had to know more. He had to know the truth. Jaghatai, with Quinn Shah and his Keshik by his side, descended down to the crumbling, burnt surface. He'd hoped to find the truth. He'd hoped to find his brother, leaving the fleet to his friend Hasek Noyan Khan. Hands he would soon find were not to be trusted.
No.
The Khan stood up again.
Whatever you are not Magnus. You don't even sound like him.
Magnus shrugged.
Believe what you want. Perhaps I am not Magnus. I used to be, that is certain. But maybe what counts as myself is not what it was. Part of me dwells elsewhere. on a barren rock halfway across the cosmos. Part of me is here, lingering like a stench over carrion. I can't quite leave, not yet. I think something has to happen first. Maybe you are it, or maybe you were never meant to be here. I favor the latter. You were always unpredictable.
I came to find a friend,
said the Khan distastefully.
Whatever else had happened, I thought I could come to you for counsel.
Magnus looked hurt.
Do not be harsh, Kagan. Only a part of me resides here, slinking in the shadows. The better part is elsewhere, pondering loftier things. Soon he, or I, or we, will come to a judgment.
Interesting.
What will that be?
I don't know. I really don't. Lorgar sends me pleas almost daily, reminding me what Russ did here. He thinks we are kindred spirits. Touching, really.
Magnus paused and stared down at his flickering hands.
Sometimes, though, I still think there might be some way back. I see it as a maze, one in which all I have to do is find the route through. Perhaps the Emperor will forgive. If he survives what I've unleashed, perhaps he will.
Then Magnus's spectral eye flickered up at the Khan again.
But you, Jaghatai, what is your choice?
The Khan shook his head.
We are who we are. No one's slaves.
Magnus laughed.
That's not good enough. You have to choose.
If what you say is true, then the dream is over. It will be each legion alone.
It doesn't work like that.
Horus corrupted. The Emperor is a tyrant.
True enough.
Then I choose neither.
Magnus laughed again, though the sound was bitter.
This thing is like a great dark star, ringed by fire. It will draw you in, bit by bit, until you are orbiting it with the rest of us. Even you do not have shibs fast enough to escape it, Jaghatai. Even your white scars will not get out.
The Khan felt sick from the stink of death and ashes. His blade glittered coldly in the near-perfect dark.
We can outrun anything that lives.
But they do not live.
Yep.
Not like we do. I do not lie, brother. Choose. We will meet again, either as allies or foes. So you may as well decide now.
The Khan stared down at Magnus, his mind in turmoil.
What have you become?
He asked, no longer able to keep the horror from his voice.
What I was always destined to be,
said Magnus, looking at him sadly.
But you still have a choice, brother. Make the right one.
The Khan held his ground, tensing.
Enough, brother.
Magnus laughed.
You don't want to know. That's always been your weakness. I know it all now. I could tell you the Emperor's name, and it would surprise you.
Interesting.
I could tell you that the Fates decreed Fulgrim to be sent to Chogoris, and you to Chemos. And I could tell you which arcane force in the universe prevented it.
He took a step, then another towards the Khan.
Do you wish to know where you will die, Kagan? Do you wish to know on what world and in which dimension your soul will find its ending?
These things are not known.
All is known.
The Khan looked at him warily.
You told me I had a choice. My fate, all fate is still to be written.
Magnus grinned. His eyes seemed to be weeping, though it was hard to tell if it was tears or blood.
Stories may meander, but the endings never change. Believe me, I have witnessed the authors.
He shuddered.
They are terrible.
He whispered, by now only inches away from the sword.
I have what I came for, brother,
said the Khan.
You can only give me one piece of knowledge that I truly desire.
Magnus inclined his head.
And what is that?
How to restore you.
Magnus stared. For a moment, He looked truly bewildered, as if he had expected mockery and received sincerity, or perhaps the other way round. He looked down at his hands, then around at the devastation of his kingdom. Misery mingled with confusion.
I am corrupted.
He whispered, as if realizing it all over again.
Restore me, and I shall become a lord again. I shall be the Crimson King, free to rule over a world of spells and vengeance. The galaxy may live to rue that.
You are my friend,
said the Khan quietly. Magnus looked at him, and for a moment, just a moment, the old dignity was there, etched upon a ravaged face and glimmering in the dark.
Then I judge you know what to do.
The Khan nodded and pulled his sword round for the strike, slivers of witchlight skittered along the runed wound steel.
Until we meet on the starlight,
he promised.
Sooner than you might think,
said Magnus, making no effort to evade the blow. The Khan swung, and the dowel glittered through the air. When it hit Magnus's outline, the ghostly shell shattered, spilling into 1,000 pieces like broken glass. A wild crack ran out, a steely snap, followed by a shriek like a child's cry. The dust around him billowed up in a cloud, swirling and writhing. The Khan was momentarily blinded and staggered back.
Damn, dude, what an interaction. Like, holy shit. Like, what is there even to like start and go over with that? Like, the idea that, you know, Magnus is telling him that his fate is actually predetermined and that any choice he has doesn't actually really matter, and he knows where he's gonna die. And then, you know, him telling him he wants to restore Magnus because of he's like his friend. You're like, holy shit, dude. That's quite the interaction, man. That's a lot to unpack there. But like, it really sucks for Jaghatai's position. I mean, like, he said it himself, you know, Horus is corrupted and the Emperor's a tyrant, and really it's true. And I mean, I think that's really the issue to begin with Jaghatai. Like, he never really truly believed in the Emperor and the Imperium because of that. Because he is a tyrant, and because he knows that the Imperial truth is a lie and what he's trying to uphold is a lie. And then, of course, you know, Magnus is one of the only close friends that he had who was a Primarch, who was with him, you know, in the protection of the Psychers, and then having to essentially seemingly kill him, or at least fracture his essence even further. Because, you know, Magnus essentially admitted to him that he's corrupted, and were he to go about and restore him, he would only bring out a being of vengeance who would try to go out and burn the galaxy, you know? That's just a rough series of interactions, man. That's not a great, that's just a rough position to be in, man. It's just, holy. What else is there really to say about that? There were times where I really wanted to pause and kind of, you know, interject some things, but I really felt like just letting that whole series play out. Man, yeah. All right, let's continue. On to the Horus heresy here.
Never do the easy thing. An apparition, a shard, a broken piece of a whole that was once his friend, was all that remained of Magnus. Just as Prospero had been burned to ashes, ravaged and broken, so
I think, am I wrong? Is Prospero not Magnus's, that's his homeworld, right? That was the homeworld for him and his legion, and was burned down by Leman Russ. Right? Am I mistaken? Correct me if I'm wrong.
As Prospero had been burned to ashes, ravaged and broken, so had the Thousand Sons and their Primarch. Roaming through the wreckage of Prospero with Quinn Shah and his Keshig, Jaghatai found himself set upon by strange ethereal monsters. And in the confusion he was separated, falling deep into the tunnel systems built below the crumbling city of Tizca, finding a ghost of what was or is Magnus. The sight broke him. He had come to find a friend, but only found the husk of the brother he had respected and even loved. The Shard of Magnus told him that time had run out, that he had to choose. He'd always run away, relying on his speed to outrun his problems. But
yep. That's like I was saying in the previous video in part 1, you know, it seems like the entire time with him just pushing further and further out to the stretches of the galaxy and conquering things as fast as possible, he was really just trying to run away from the situation that he was forced to be put in, and seemingly trying to get the Great Crusade over as quickly as possible so that he could just go back home to his people and live his life and do his thing on Chigoris and not have any part of the Imperium. And it seems to be catching up to him now because of his lack of wanting to get into politics and doing anything to promote the use of psychers and sanctioning the use of psychers. That's now backfired, and seemingly also because of Magnus's arrogance, you know, as made the use of psychers. I don't know if at that point it put the use of psychers as a no-no or what, or if that comes after the Horus heresy, but yeah, I don't know. It seems like Jaghatai has been put in a lot of really rough situations, you know, at this point in time in the history of the 40K universe. And now, again, being forced to choose sides again. You know, he was forced to choose the Imperium over his people in order to protect his people. And now he's being forced to choose between Horus and potentially... He's being forced between Horus, who is someone he cared about, but who is now known to be corrupted, or an emperor tyrant that he doesn't really care anything about, but yeah, I guess you could say is on the right side of things. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, it's just, what do, you know?
This away, relying on his speed to outrun his problems. But this war would find him and his sons. He had to choose. Choose a side. With all the cards on the table, with the shards of wisdom, the truth was out. The Emperor had lied. Yaksha, demons were real. And Jaghatai had to make a choice. But what kind of choice was it? The words rang in his head. Horus is corrupted. The Emperor is a tyrant. Foul entities of the warp had corrupted the brother he loved, Horus, but he would be accepted by them. A life of unending conquest awaited him and his sons, but humanity would suffer. The Emperor is a tyrant, one who lies to his people, crushing thousands of worlds under the guise of compliance. The Imperium looked down upon him and his sons, but there was a future for humanity under the Imperium. So I fight for a father who I never loved, against a brother that I did. I defend an empire that never wanted me, against an army that would have taken me in a heartbeat. Jaghatai made his choice, putting the Shard of Magnus to rest, and escaping out of the depths, he reunited with Quinn Shah and his remaining Keshig, who had rescued one lone survivor from the ruins of Prospero, Reviel Arvida, a psyche of immense power. But as they prepared to return to their vessel, the storm-riddled skies darkened. A teleportation circle erupted before them as Mortarion, Primarch of the Death Guard, emerged, surrounded by his Death Shroud guard. The sight of the pale, sickly thing, whose rebreather rattled like death's music, was a sight that would fill any mortal with reverence and dread. The brother who he had last seen above Ullanor, the one who, like him, had been assigned to the outskirts of the Great Crusade, forgotten, misunderstood. Mortarion began to speak, to offer his brother the chance to join Horus, destroy the Emperor who lies. Oh, and he hated the lies, didn't he? He offered a galaxy of warriors, a galaxy of hunters, where the strong are given their freedom. A galaxy in which there is no dead hand at the tiller, constraining them, lying to them. Besides, half of his legion had already been turned, so it was only a matter of time. But Jaghatai stopped him. He had seen through him, his mysterious brother. He had campaigned against the Psyche, only to now find himself in collusion with them. Legions embracing the warp. He was not here because of brotherhood. He was here because he had no more allies. The Death Guard, the slow, indestructible anvil, with the white scars, the perfect, swift hammer, they would be unstoppable together. And when the Emperor and Horus were gone, there could be space for a new Emperor. Jaghatai felt nothing but disgust for this selfish betrayal, and he would not be dragged down with them. They had chosen to collude with foul entities of the warp. They were fools. And besides, long ago, the oath had already been made. Mortarion's sickle crackled into life. The two sides clashed. The slow but yet resilient Mortarion versus the lightning-fast Kagan. It was like a battle between gods. Jaghatai's blinding speed and dancing strikes began to tally wounds.
The only thing that really kind of honestly, like when I start thinking about like the Primarchs fighting each other and things like that, the only like kind of piece of medium that kind of comes to mind is like Dragon Ball, you know, just the idea of these two demigod beings essentially being able to destroy cities and landscapes, fighting each other for hours, days, weeks, you know, maybe before a duel could potentially be decided. You know, I've said this a lot in certain videos. I just really hope that with the 40K cinematic universe that Henry Cavill and Amazon are putting together, that a lot of these things we get to actually see on a cinematic screen, and they're done right. Because I would like, there's so many, all these characters, they're just epic characters. And a lot of these scenes that they're talking about would just be amazing scenes to actually see play out, you know, in a cinematic setting. You know, anyway, let's continue.
Odds. Jaghatai's blinding speed and dancing strikes began to tally wounds. The Khan laughed. Wielding his blade again freely felt good. Going up against a fellow Primarch was a kind of test he had missed for too long. But for the first time in his life, Jaghatai felt tiredness. Mortarion stood bloodied. Dozens of wounds covered him, but the few that he had landed on Jaghatai were punishing, toxin-laden gashes. A stalemate had been reached. Mortarion, enraged and bitter, began to retreat. The Death Lord pledged that this wound between them was not over, and that one of them would die at the other's hands. With the help of the Thousand-Son Rivial Arvida, Jaghatai, Quinn Shah, and the remaining Keshik teleported back onto their flagship, only to find utter chaos. The warrior lodges, that secretive organization that had festered for decades amongst the legions, had risen up, declaring themselves for Horus, for the War Master, for the universe of warriors and hunters. Thousands of the Terrans and Jagorians, either by resentment for their forced conversion into the Jagorian way of life, or simply convinced by the universe painted by Horus, had been turned in secret. Hasek Noyan Khan, a man who had been with Jaghatai from the start, had tried to force the Legion's hand, force them into the future of warriors and hunters. Horror gripped Jaghatai, seeing the carnage of the 5th Legion's civil strife. Brothers slaying brothers. Striding through the middle of the bloodbath, the fighting began to die down. As Jaghatai roared his disgust at his friend's betrayal, he plunged his Dao sword deep into the panicking Hasek's torso, declaring this coup over. Humbled and shamed, the traitors were escorted to the brigs as Jaghatai and the 5th prepared for war.
Man, that's so, like, can you just imagine being in this position? Being forced to choose, then basically having the choice made for you, like, well, let's just, like, recap here, essentially, you know? Being, you know, having the Emperor come to him and being essentially forced to do the Emperor's bidding. Because if he didn't, he would be killed and his people would be killed. So you have that situation. Then fast forward now to the heresy. Well, I guess you could even say before the heresy, essentially you just being a recluse, really only having a relationship with a couple of the Primarchs, not really caring for the Emperor, the Imperium, and being forced to essentially do things, fight for a way of life that is in opposition to your upbringing, your cultural beliefs, your personal beliefs, whatever. And then now in the heresy, being forced to, again, he was, the choice really was made for him, but he was brought with the choice of fight for, you know, Horus, who is someone he cared about and respected. It was one of the only few Primarchs who did. But, you know, knowing that it's been corrupted by the warp and that could potentially not be any kind of future for his people. So he chose, again, for his people to fight for the Emperor, to preserve humanity, because that would be the only way that humanity would have any kind of future, and thus his people would have any kind of future. But in doing so, not only is he betraying Horus, he's fighting against Horus, who someone he cares about. He's fighting against Magnus, who someone he cares about. You know, and he kills a fragment of Magnus. And now after this fight with Mortarion, he's got, you know, a coup happening where he's having to fight and kill and imprison his own men, some of which maybe are from his, you know, home planet. And it's just like one thing after another after another. It's rough, man. That's rough.
Betrayed by one of his closest friends.
Yeah.
A man who he had spent centuries with was a bitter snag at the heart of Jaghatai.
I mean, it would be enough to break someone, even a Primarch, dude. Like, especially one with his kind of personality. His whole thing is, you know, he hates lies. He's an honorable man. He lives his life basically kind of like on his sleeve, I guess you could say. I don't know if that's the right, you know, phrase or term, but what you see is what you get, essentially, with him. He's, you know, it's face value with him. He's an honorable man. He doesn't tell a lie. He likes to fight, and that's pretty much what his life is really all about. And now he's thrust in this situation where he's betrayed again and again and again and again. Like, how, like, it would just be like, it keeps amounting to a situation of who really can you trust at this point? You know, your own men are betraying you. someone who you've known for forever has betrayed you and you had to kill him, you know, like, and then other Primarchs that you, brothers, whatever, you know, you're having to fight and kill them. It's just, that's a rough situation. I've said it a bunch of times, but it's like, even for a Primarch who would be that, you know, strong-willed and etc., like, there's got to be a breaking point, you know what I mean? And I almost feel like for him, a third choice would be to just abstain from the fight and just, you know, retreat back to Jagoras, I guess, maybe, and see who wins, and just not engage and just protect your own people. You know, that could be a third option, of just saying, fuck it, you know, I don't care about this. I don't care about Horus and these corrupted demons. I don't care about the Emperor and him being a tyrant. But I guess it's also one of those situations where if you don't pick a side, whoever wins is probably going to turn their eye on you. And yeah, then you're going to have to defend yourself against a force that you may not be capable of doing anything against, one way or the other, whether it be Horus and his minions of chaos or whatever, or the Imperium itself. So it's not a good situation for you no matter what you do.
For war. Betrayed by one of his closest friends, a man who he had spent centuries with, was a bitter snag at the heart of Jaghatai. Though some relief came as he was finally reunited with Yasugai. 7 years the Kagan had been deprived of his chief Stormseer, his closest advisor, his friend, locked within the disaster that had been the Council of Nikaea and the subsequent warp storms around Chondax. The traitors were dealt with. Hasek and thousands of others were locked away. They all deserved death. But it was Yasugai who counseled that the previous Warrior Lodge members, the Terrans and Chagorans, be offered a route to redemption. They were charged with the crime of being fools as well as traitors, not truly knowing the extent to which the War Master Horus had fallen. It was due in part to the bravery of such men as Shiban Khan, who had held long enough for Jaghatai to end the civil conflict. The Magyar Mazan, death squads, a road to redemption was offered, for in this coming war, they would need every able-bodied warrior. The Horus heresy had truly begun. 9 legions had betrayed the Emperor of Mankind, declaring their loyalty to the War Master Horus. 3 loyalist legions, the Salamanders, the Raven Guard and Iron Hands, were almost entirely wiped. The remaining 6 loyalists either scattered or divided as war and violent warp storms ravaged the galaxy. What began was the most brutal war in human history. Billions of innocents would die. Legionaries slaughtering each other. Worlds burning. Again, the words burn.
Because, I mean, it's not just the Astartes fighting other Astartes. It would be, you know, other Imperial soldiers from other planets fighting other Imperial soldiers and Astartes and etc., etc. So, I mean, yeah, it's literally the galaxy being ignited in a civil war.
Each other, worlds burning. Again, the words burned in Jaghatai's mind. Never had so few been given so much power. It was a mistake, an emperor's mistake. One caused when his father believed the lie that tells you can put up walls and you will be safe. Jaghatai, Yasugai, Quin Shah, Ilya, Shiban, Jubal, and Reviel Ardor of the Thousand Suns began to enact their wrath upon the traitor legions. The fingers of the 5th Legion branched off, enacting their grip across light years of real space. With lightning-fast hit-and-run tactics, isolated traitor fleets would be destroyed, supply lines harassed, equipment sabotaged, each small piece adding up to a delay. Time for the Imperial forces at Terra to fortify. They all knew that the palace would be where this would end. Years of non-stop, brutal warfare consumed humanity, but its cost to Jaghatai and the White Scars was more than just their brothers' lives. The soul of the Legion was dying.
Yeah.
The heresy was changing them. They were fighting men who they had once served with, men who they had bled with, watching them cut down their own brothers in brutal legionary upon legionary duels. Jaghatai and the Fifth had come from a world where the beauty and adrenaline pumping, life-affirming combat was something they lived for. Hunting Xenos across the stars, feeling the wind rush on their face, the freedom and joy of the plains taken to the stars. But there was no more joyous laughing, no more whooping cries, no more cheek-to-cheek smiles, just brutal
Just war and
human
death.
slaughter.
Yep.
Members such as Shiban Khan, encouraged by his Primarchs' ethos of the noble pursuits, found he had nothing to celebrate, nothing noble to express. Killing was one thing. They had been bred to do that, but inflicting pain, hurting their enemies, this war had changed them. Jaghatai had not brought his people to the stars for this. Their enemies had changed too, taken over by worship to the Yaksha.
Yep.
Their corruption manifested physically.
And you would think, I mean, I guess at it becomes a point where once you're corrupted, it doesn't matter. And at that point, any kind of, chaos, corruption, mutations that happen, it doesn't really matter. You don't see it that way. But I would think that there's got to be some other legions, legionnaires, Astartes or whatever, who maybe are on the fringes and they start seeing this kind of corruption. And it's like, bro, what the fuck is this? Is this what we're fighting for, to become these things? And then I guess, they would either make their escape, be killed, turn, I don't know. But it's just like, when you see what these things are turning into, you kind of start to really realize what you're fighting for and against. And I don't know. I don't know if Jaghatai would ever... I don't know if seeing these things would ever make Jaghatai kind of understand, what the Emperor was trying to do with his lie and his secrecy and protecting against the demons of chaos. Or if it was a situation where if he just told them to begin with and taught them how to protect themselves to begin with, this maybe didn't happen. I don't know. I still say my personal belief is that the Emperor was just trying to starve chaos by not giving anyone any reason to believe in them. And that's how he was trying to weaken and fight them. But anyway, that's a topic that I've talked about in some other videos, and I might do an actual dedicated video on at some point, but not for this one.
To the Yaksha, their corruption manifested physically. A sobering reminder of a path Jaghatai could have gone down.
Yep.
If his love for horrors had eclipsed his sense. 4 years of no rest.
Well, and it's also, I wonder, it was stated in part 1 that I did of this that their Stormseers were, what's the word? Not cautious. Cautious isn't the word I'm looking for, but I guess it's a word that could do. Cautious in their use of the warp. They guarded themselves, protected themselves. They limited themselves essentially to how much they could use and see, so they never allowed themselves to be corrupted or be invaded by the demons. I guess probably because of, again, their cultural beliefs and understanding of them, that chaos, and they were a thing that they were able to learn to ward and protect themselves and only tap into so much of the warp so that the denizens of chaos would never really be able to turn their gaze toward them as a means of corrupting them essentially, or you know, maybe they were just able to, again, protect themselves from it. So I wonder if because of that, he would never have necessarily really been able to be corrupted. I don't know. I don't know really what I'm trying to say here, but I guess I wonder if because of his cultural upbringing, that would have in some way had, if he turned with Horus, if that would have kept him from really being like corruptible to a certain level of chaos, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Or if he started seeing all the corruption around him, if that would have, you know, changed his views or changed his mind about what side to be on if he had gone with Horus to begin with.
Had eclipsed his sense. 4 years of no rest. Nearly 1/3 of Jaghatai's sons were dead. Then the worst news of all came. In a confrontation with Eidolon of the Emperor's children, Quinn Shah was dead. His body recovered in thanks to the efforts of Reviel Arvida, a debt the Legion could never repay, with his friend's broken helm in his hands.
Damn.
As Quinn Shah's body was cast into the void of space, returned to the universe, as was the Jagoran way, Jaghatai felt the grief wash over him. Jagorians knew that to die in battle was a glorious end they all desired, but this was tainted in a way. Jaghatai assembled the Kurultai, a place for all to speak. All of them, Jaghatai, Yasugai, Ilya, Shiban, Jubal, and Arvida, with Quinn Shah's death still in their hearts, debated on the Legion's next move. The walls were closing in. The traitors had them in a noose. They had adapted to the 5th's tactics, and now it was costing them. Half wanted to make a final stand, bearing the weight of melancholic soldiers hoping to die a good death. But Yasugai and Ilya urged them to find a way to terror. They could still fight. Jaghatai made his decision. The oath had been made. The White Scars would stand on terror. The 5th Legion assembled everything they had and headed towards their last gambit, the location of a powerful navigator who could guide them through the warp storms, terrorizing the galaxy. But the journey would not be smooth. Mortarion, the wound created on Prospero, had reopened. With the Death Guard Legion and a force of Emperor's children, the brothers prepared to face each other once again. Only hatred and disgust left between them.
All right, well, and then we're gearing up for their duel that's going to happen here. So, all right, well, we're going to end this part of the video here. That's going to be part 2. That was just the thing that really stands out to me about that part was just the interaction with him and Magnus. That was just a sad situation, and it was just really a rough situation in general for Jaghatai and his Legion. And I pretty much went over it as we went through it in the video, so there isn't really much else for me to summarize other than he just seems to be put in harder and harder situations where he keeps having choices made for him, and he really doesn't have the ability to do the things that he wants to do. I honestly would not have faulted him for just saying fuck it and taking his Legion and just going back home and waiting to see who was the victor and just staying out of the fighting. You know, I wouldn't have faulted him for that, but we're yeah, his Legion definitely seems to be taking a toll on him, you know, with this, because it's like who can you trust? Even a lot of people who you were very close to are betraying you here now. So it's like, what are you supposed to do? And not even the one thing that gave you joy, which was fighting and conquering, gives you joy anymore, because you're fighting, you know, brothers, you're fighting humans, people you know, people who you've stood with and fought with you're now fighting against and having to kill. So there's no real joy to that combat. There's no real joy to the conquering. You know what I mean? So, but that's going to do it for part 2 here. Appreciate you guys hanging out. As always, there will be a link in the description below for this video and the Amber Kings channel. So if you want to watch this video without my commentary, without my reaction, you can do that. And you can always go check out the Amber Kings channel. I would definitely encourage you to do that if you haven't. He makes a lot of great 40K content, and go over there, give him a like, give him a sub, all that kind of stuff. Check out his content, and if you want to support him that extra mile, check out any kind of sponsorship stuff he's got going on to help the man out and keep doing what he's doing. As far as me, you know, if you enjoy this video, consider leaving a like and a sub. If you would like to support me, you know, more than just giving that like and a sub, you can click the join button down below. See if any of the YouTube membership tiers have anything that would interest you. I'm still working on building those up and adding more things to it, and trying to get time so I can do more stuff for those people who decide they want to be members. So yeah, just click all that, see if any of that stuff joins you. Shameless plugs, etc., etc. I hate having to do it, but you know, it's part of the job. You know what I mean? If I could get to be doing this here on for my main job, then you know, that's just more stuff that I can put out for you guys, and that's ultimately the dream. So appreciate you guys, appreciate you watching, and I hope you're having yourself a wonderful day. Talk to you later.